Hi, I'm Jim Zogby, and welcome to Viewpoint. Tonight we'll get an analysis of the situation in Syria with Rob Malley. He was program director for the Middle East and North Africa with the International Crisis Group and served in the Clinton administration. Then we'll take a look at another region of conflict, Afghanistan, with Rick Nelson, former Navy pilot who served in Afghanistan and is a senior fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. But first, in this election year, thanks to the creation of super PACs, money's come to play a huge role in presidential campaigns. Joining me with her view on the controversial trend is Kiely. She's managing editor for the Sunlight Foundation, an organization that works toward a more open and transparent government. She's former managing editor of politics at National Journal, former political reporter for USA Today, and has covered every presidential campaign since 1980. I said almost 1880, sorry.
You were giving me a promotion.
You've been on the show before,
yes,
as we've talked about the presidential campaigns, but now we're going to talk about just money.
And that's the story this year.
There have been so many articles about it, but I want to start with just one story that I saw in the Washington Post that reported that money overall was half of what it was in 2008. Is money playing a big role, or is it playing less of a role this time, or what kind of role is it playing?
Money always plays a big role in politics. I think it's playing a different role this time, and it's. I don't think we've really seen exactly how big a role it's going to play yet, because of the nature of the way the money game has changed, and that's largely due to a series of court decisions and FEC rulings that were kicked off in 2010 by the Citizens United ruling in the Supreme Court, which really fundamentally altered the way the campaign finance regulation system works, and it opened the door for these super PACs, and we're really just beginning to see what kind of an impact they're going to have. But I think that the bottom line is, it means less power for the parties, potentially less power for the candidates, and more power for these outside forces, some of which are related to the candidates, some not.
In terms of amounts, how much has been raised by the super PACs thus far?
We know that we don't know exactly how much has been raised, because we're waiting for another report that'll come out next week, but we know that $76 million has been spent as of today.
How much for the candidates themselves?
The candidates themselves, again, I think we're behind the curve because we're about a month behind. We'll get a new report next week. But the super PACs are spending pretty much at a clip that's on pace with the candidates, if not, in fact, outdoing them.
It's interesting because I think some of the campaign, as little as the money has been compared with 2008 in terms of the candidates raising it, I think it's a weak field, which is accounting for why some of the candidates haven't been raising money. But in some cases, this campaign has been driven by super PACs. I mean, Santorum in Iowa, his super PAC spent 10 times more than he personally spent. Gingrich in South Carolina was driven by super PACs. And Romney everywhere. I mean, his negative campaigns that have been destroying his opponents one by one have been super PAC money. Talk about that a little bit, and about the role that they play separate from the campaigns. They're not supposed to be coordinated, but clearly they are.
Yes, well, it all depends on what coordination means. And I think a couple things about what you said. I think in terms of the candidates' fundraising, remember that this is a very different year. I think 4 years ago, first of all, you had wide open races on both sides. Both the Democratic and the Republican races were wide open. And you had people who were kind of fresh to the presidential field. This time around, President Obama is an incumbent, so he's a known quantity, perhaps less exciting to voters for that reason. And on the Republican side, it's a bunch of retreads. They're all people who have been around the circuit once before, so that may have an impact on the fundraising too. But what you're seeing on in the super PACs, they are the new character in this presidential campaign. The super PACs, not the candidates. And the super PACs are not supposed to coordinate, as you said, with the candidates, but candidates, the FEC has defined this very liberally, what coordination means. So basically all it means is that if you're the candidate and I'm the super PAC, you can't call me up and say, you know, Kathy, I'm spending my ad dollars over here in Cincinnati. Could you buy me an ad in Cleveland so I can win the Ohio primary? You can't do that. But you as the candidate could appear at a fundraiser that I host, and while you're not allowed to ask for any more than $5,000 per to $2,500 for the primary and $2,500 for the general, I can ask for $10 million if you'd like. So there were obviously close relations between the super PACs and the candidates. Most of the super PACs are staffed by people who 4 years ago were working for these candidates' campaigns. They're former aides to the people, so they're obviously very close to the candidates. So it's really an extension of these campaigns.
On this issue of coordination or non-coordination, I remember 60 Minutes a number of years ago doing something on AIPAC, finding a memo. AIPAC, which is the pro-Israel lobby, does not raise money for candidates, but there are 30-plus pro-Israel PACs that happen to be headed by people who are on the board of AIPAC. And here was a memo that 60 Minutes showed, which said to different characters, let's give to this guy, and this guy, and then sure enough, within a matter of days, 5,000 appeared, bundled. And here we have now in this election, without coordination, they say, in every state that Romney goes, he is advanced by literally hundreds of thousands of dollars attacking Gingrich when Gingrich is number one, or attacking Santorum when he's number one. They're targeted, they're strategic, and they have an impact on the race. And how does that happen, and how do you, who are Sunlight, shed some light on this so that we will learn, is there a way other than if we don't get in our hot little hands the memo, how do you figure out, is circumstantial evidence enough to suggest coordination?
Well, one thing that's funny about these super PACs are their names. Their names are in fact, they all have very similar names. At Sunlight, we've created these refrigerator magnets so you can pull them apart, and because of the names, there's restore, future, a lot of words repeat in these names, and they're kind of like George Orwell creations. They all are these feel-good names, but they don't link to the candidates. So there's nothing that says pro-Romney, anti-Santorum. And so what we're trying to do, and because as you point out, a lot of the ads, what the super PACs have become in many cases are the bad cops.
They're the opposition research of the
They're
campaigns.
the ones who do the negative advertising. And what that does is it allows the candidates to keep their hands clean. So what we're trying to do is let voters know. We've created a scorecard on our website, which is reporting.sunlightfoundation.com. We have a chart that tells you who these organizations are. You can click on the names, find out who's behind them, get profiles. Because when you hear this ad's been paid for by Restore Our Future, there's nothing to tell you that that's Mitt Romney's group. Or there's nothing, if it's Winning Our Future, there's nothing to tell you that's Newt Gingrich's group. So one of the things we're trying to do is make that information available to voters so
Does
they
it
know.
have an impact? You call for transparency, but is transparency enough? For example, the Sheldon Adelson money for Newt Gingrich. Everyone knows about it. It's $5 million, and then some yet undisclosed amount that he just put into. And this is literally the money that is driving that campaign. Newt is not raising money. He's being driven by this super PAC. But it doesn't seem to make a difference. It's not an issue in his campaign. I mean, he's rising or falling on his own sword, not because the money has become the issue. Will transparency alone make a difference?
Well, I'm not sure you can say that. I mean, there may be other issues in the race. I mean, obviously, these candidates are talking about a lot of different issues, and they have personalities and personal quirks that may be affecting whether or not voters are for them or opposed to them. But I do think it makes a difference to let people know who is trying to influence their vote, and that's what we're trying to do. And I do think that large sums of money often have a backlash effect. So we'll see. I don't think we've seen for sure what the ultimate impact will be of either the money or the exposure of what's behind or who's behind the money. And we can't completely reveal that because there's another wrinkle here, which is that the law allows for 501c organizations, nonprofits, to also give money to campaigns. We haven't seen a lot of that yet, but we think we will, and those folks don't have to disclose who's donating.
Which is the next question I wanted to ask you about the potential for bigger abuses. I remember in the 1996 race, the Clinton campaign was haunted by these foreign donors who were funneling money in. That was a very different system. They had to use domestic individuals to take the money and insert it in the campaign. But this doesn't even have to happen anymore. If the Chinese government, for example, decided that it wanted influence, it could contribute to a 501c4, which could then spend money in a race on the issues that impact them, and there's not even a disclosure of the source.
That's right. It would be illegal to do that, but there would be no way of knowing that it happened.
It's illegal, but no way of knowing.
You're not allowed to use foreign money in a U.S. election. That's prohibited. But there would be. But you're absolutely right that because 501c nonprofit organizations, which can organize under the nonprofit section of the tax code, they do not have to disclose their donors, but they are permitted to contribute now, post Citizens United, to these campaigns. So it does create an enforcement problem.
You mentioned before that the super PACs are replacing the parties. The political parties were once political organizations that mobilized people, gave them access to power, and provided patronage. That is long gone, except in a few instances, a couple of cities that still operate that way. They then became money-raising operations, but they're now even lagging behind the super PACs as money-raising operations. Is there a danger here that these shadowy enterprises funded by a few rather substantial individuals, whether Democrats or Republicans, we haven't heard from some of the Democrats yet, they haven't yet begun to weigh in, but is there a danger that you end up with basically an oligopoly of political engines being run by very wealthy individuals with no accountability to the base of the party or to the electorate as a whole?
Well, sure. I mean, I think one of the problems with the system that we're seeing unfold this time is that in the past you've seen money tended to follow the votes. So if a candidate were successful, he or she could raise money. Now, if they've got one well-heeled patron, they can keep on going indefinitely, whether they've got the support or
not.
not.
Like Newt.
Exactly.
For example.
Exhibit A.
Is there blowback yet? What would it take for there to be the kind of outcry that there was in '96 or the outcry that there was in the '70s at the time of Watergate, for example, where you get a congressional or legislative fix that can undo the Citizens United decision? Are we there? Is there enough outrage yet, or will there have to be something that would create a tipping point?
Well, John McCain has always said it would take a scandal, and certainly the elements are there for a scandal. It also could be undone by the court itself. If the Supreme Court, which said in its Citizens United opinion that it thought transparency would be the antidote to corruption, decides that there isn't enough transparency, maybe they'll change their minds.
Have we seen anything yet on the congressional level? I mean, we're seeing the presidential campaigns, but are congressional candidates developing super PACs, or is that not yet an issue?
Yes. I mean, I think the only reason you haven't seen or heard much about it is because we're just getting into the primary season where some of these super PACs are coming into play. But yes, we're tracking the expenditures, and we are seeing it. We saw it just this week in Alabama. There were some very heavy expenditures in one of the congressional primaries there by a super PAC.
And the big guys haven't weighed in yet. The Karl Rove Crossroads operation or the Democratic presidential operation.
We've seen some expenditures by Crossroads, but you're right. I think most of those folks are going to hold their fire till the fall campaign, so we ain't seen nothing yet.
But then we'll see you again when it comes time. You'll be back?
Absolutely, with lots more figures.
Thank you. When we come back, we're going to look at the situation in Syria with Rob Malley, Program Director for Middle East and North Africa at the International Crisis Group. Stay with us. Thanks.